Back in 1959, the British Motor Corporation, or BMC, introduced a new car under its Austin and Morris marques that would later become known simply as the Mini. It became immensely popular, not just in the UK, but in many countries worldwide, and spawned a rally version thanks to a partnership with race car designer John Cooper. The Mini became its own marque in 1969 and lived on until 2000, whereupon new owner BMW jumped on the retro bandwagon and relaunched the marque, sharing nothing with the original except the name. This is the story of the Mini. This is my old car. The Mini is arguably the second most recognizable car in the world, just behind the Volkswagen Beetle. Its iconic look is known worldwide, thanks to it once being built and or sold not just in Europe, but also North America, South America, Africa, Australia, and East Asia. Like the Beetle, even non-car people know what it is, thanks in no small part to its prominent role in the classic Mr. Bean series from the 1990s. But also from the 1969 movie, The Italian Job. As you would expect from a channel called My Old Car, most of this episode will focus on the classic Mini, although there will be some discussion near the end about the BMW reboot. Although big cars with lots of chrome were all the rage in the US during the latter half of the 1950s, the automotive marketplace in the UK was moving in the opposite direction, with increased popularity of much smaller cars, thanks to the Suez oil crisis of 1956.
On open spaces, on disused airfields, the thousands of brand new vehicles are lined up with nowhere to go.
Cars like the BMW Isetta and the Fiat 500 were gaining ground in the UK, a country which until then typically shunned imports.
Top speed 40 miles an hour, 50 if you were mad.
BMC itself had only been around since 1952, following the merger of Morris and Austin, and the head of the BMC back then, Leonard Lord, pushed for a new mini car design to compete with the imports. His strict requirements were that the car be no longer than 10 feet in length, 4 feet in width, and 4 feet in height. It also had to have at least 80% of the car's volume dedicated to passenger and luggage space. Lord recruited former Morris Motors engineer Alec Issigonis to head the project, initially codenamed XC9003.
The easiest way to win a bet of this sort is to make a car that is so unusual compared with all the other cars around it that it automatically becomes a status symbol.
To meet the strict limitations imposed on the design, Issigonis, who today is considered the father of the Mini, along with his team of 8 designers and engineers, pushed the wheels to the far corners and switched the engine to a transverse orientation with front-wheel drive. Rubber cones were used for the suspension instead of more traditional springs to better adjust to the weight of the passengers, since a full load of 4 people could potentially double the car's gross weight. With such a small engine compartment, they put the gearbox under the engine, which was lubricated using the same oil as the engine. The engine itself was known as the A-Series, a 4-cylinder used in other Morris models since 1952, but in this new car it would initially be designed with its smallest displacement up to that point, 848 cc's. This limited it to only 72 miles per hour, but that was more than enough for a car that weighed less than 600 kilograms. The new car would initially be known as the Morris Mini Minor, as it was smaller than the existing Morris Minor. One of the features of the car that kept its weight so low was the thickness of the doors. Unlike a typical car back then or now, there were no interior door panels. With no place for a window to roll down, they instead slid sideways, and in the place where the windows would normally roll down to were storage bins, which added some structural rigidity, but they were really intended to compensate for the small amount of luggage space behind the rear seat. Even the door hinges were exposed. There also wasn't much weight in the wheels, which were only 10 inches in diameter, but those small wheels also meant smaller wheel wells and less intrusion into the cabin. Even the dashboard was designed with a center-located speedometer and open space on either side for more storage. Clearly, crashworthiness and protection of the occupants in an accident wasn't too high on the priority list, but this was over 60 years ago. As I noted before, it officially had the name Morris Mini Minor, but it also was sold under several other names depending on where it was sold, such as the 850, the Partner, and the Mascot. It was also sold as the Austin 7, a name last used on Austin models in the 1920s and 30s. Although by 1961, the 7 was rebranded as the Austin Mini, which came as a surprise to another British car manufacturer called Sharps Commercial Limited, later known as Bond, as they had already been selling 3-wheel cars that they had branded as mini cars. Luckily, no legal fight was made by Bond, and Austin was allowed to continue using the Mini name. Although the original iconic Mini design is the one most people likely remember, Austin and Morris also offered larger models, called the Austin Mini Countryman and the Morris Mini Traveler. Each of these cars were about 4 inches longer than the original Mini, and were considered estates, with barn door style access in the rear. Optional was real ash trim, making them true woodies. Some models even had folding rear seats that laid flat, intended to be used as a bed. There was also a model called the Mini Van, said in 2 separate words long before the term minivan became a thing. The Mini Van was essentially a traveler without the rear quarter windows, and there was even a Mini pickup that shared the same underlying platform as the estate and van models. Although the Mini estates, vans, and pickups may not be as well known today, what is well known today is the name Mini Cooper, which began in 1961. The name Cooper referred to John Cooper, owner of the Cooper Car Company and friend of Alec Issigonis. Cooper founded his company in 1947, which had become well known in the 50s and 60s for their rear-engine single-seat race cars that saw action in both Formula One and the Indy 500. Cooper's team upgraded the 848cc engine to just under 1 liter, increasing horsepower from 34 to 55. It also had twin carburetors and disc brakes, unheard of for such a small car at the time. They commissioned 1,000 of them to be built that first year to meet the homologation rules for Group 2 rally racing. There was also a Cooper S model that added about 80 more cc's of displacement and larger brakes. You may expect that all the first-gen Minis had manual transmissions, but in 1965, as an option, an automatic transmission was available. However, it really was a mix of both manual and automatic, as it still had a gear lever to shift manually. However, you could also move the shifter into a lower gate that allowed it to shift automatically. These Minis were the smallest cars at the time to ever offer automatic transmissions. The Mark II generation of the Mini began in 1967, now with a larger grille and rear window, but otherwise still looked much like the Mark I. The similar look allowed pre-1968 Mark I models to be disguised as Mark II models for the 1969 comic caper movie, The Italian Job. 16 of these Minis were used for the film, despite only 3 of them ever appearing on screen at any one time. Although all the 16 Minis were destroyed during filming, 3 of the cars were painstakingly reassembled and restored, thanks to the money and time spent by the film star, Michael Caine.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off!
Surprisingly, Caine only learned how to drive during the course of filming, so whenever you see him in the film, he's not driving.
Now as you go round, look for that bloody exit. We can't go around here all night.
More changes took place to parent company BMC in 1968, thanks to a merger with truck and bus manufacturer Leyland Motor, now becoming British Leyland Motor Corporation. This new ownership led to Mini becoming its own separate mark in 1969, and improvements made to the Mini to officially become the Mark III. Mark IIIs finally gave in to public demand by offering windows that could be winded up and down, as opposed to sliding side to side, and the door hinges were no longer visible on the outside. There was also a new model called the Clubman, which had a restyled front end that increased its overall length by 4 inches. The Clubman was also offered by 1970 as an estate model, which added another 10 inches to the length and replaced the former Countryman and Traveler models. The Mark IV Mini started in 1976 with only minor changes, as it was expected at that point that British Leyland was going to replace it with an all-new model. The Mini's overall shape and design hadn't changed much in 15 years, and was looking increasingly outdated. By 1980, competitors like the Renault 5, Ford Fiesta, and Volkswagen Polo were forcing export volumes of the Mini to slow. British Leyland themselves added a potential demise of the Mini by introducing the Austin Mini Metro that same year. But the Mark IV Mini continued to be produced alongside the Mini Metro, and since they shared powertrains, the Minis also improved in addition to better interior soundproofing and front disc brakes. Although Mini production numbers dropped in favor of the newer Mini Metro, the parts sharing between the two models allowed the cost to remain reasonable and kept the Mini in production. But the lower sales also resulted in the van and pickup variants being dropped by 1983. In 1984, to mark the Mini's 25th anniversary and the beginning of the Mark V, a special limited edition model was released. That, along with continued marketing of the Mini as a low-price city car geared towards younger drivers, began a slow but steady increase in Mini sales in the second half of the 1980s, going from 35,000 sold in 1985 to over 40,000 in 1990, the final year of the Mark V. The Cooper model was reintroduced that same year, which helped it reach that sales milestone. This was not long after Mini's parent company, British Leyland, was broken up, and Mini, along with Rover, were acquired by British Aerospace.
When it comes to dancing in the streets, no car even gets close.
Are you ready for when you
Also in 1990, another milestone occurred which probably did more for promoting the Mini than any previous marketing could have ever done. On January 1st, 1990, the first episode aired for a British comedy series called Mr. Bean. The title character, played magnificently by English actor Rowan Atkinson, drove a Mini in the series, and in almost every episode the car plays a role, effectively becoming a character in the show along with Mr. Bean. Although the first episode had an orange Mark I Morris Mini that was modified to look like a Mark II. Later episodes featured a 1977 Mark IV Mini, painted green with a black bonnet. Multiple cars were used over the course of the series with the same paint scheme, intended to be the same car throughout, but true fans of Mr. Bean can identify the small details which can uniquely identify each car. Sadly, more than one of Mr. Bean's Minis met an untimely end, thanks to runaway tanks, although they were models without an engine to make them a little easier to crush. Mini's ownership under British Aerospace didn't last long, as by 1994, BMW purchased Rover and Mini, with BMW's goal to use their newly gained expertise in smaller cars to develop new BMW compact models, such as the BMW 1 Series. But they also wanted to modernize the Mini, and began development of an all-new Mini in 1998. The last of the original Minis ended production in October of 2000, after nearly 5.4 million had been sold. The new German-owned Mini would share the classic Mini's front-wheel drive and transverse engine layout, as well as key features to evoke the original, such as the large round speedometer in the center of the dashboard.
Oh, yep, this is definitely a Mini.
The new Mini, now using the Cooper name on each model above the base version, was initially a huge success when it debuted in 2001, with some models ironically sporting a Union Jack on the roof, despite the car being more German than English.
Your spy car's a Mini?
It's not the size, mate. It's how you use it.
Although the new Mini was intended to evoke the style of the original, it definitely was larger, which is very clear when it's parked alongside a classic Mini. However, as the 2000s progressed, in the United States, where SUVs and crossovers were continuing their steady gain towards dominance in the car market, the Mini represented exactly what Americans were moving away from.
Mini Cooper.
This led BMW to offer new variations that were larger, such as the Clubman, the Paceman, the Countryman, and they even brought back the Club Van, which is one of the rarest models. Some Minis offered 4 doors, which the Classic never had. They also tried smaller coupes and convertibles.
I can't breathe in this thing!
But ultimately, it was cars like the larger Countryman that represented their best chance to compete with crossovers, even though the car really wasn't that Mini anymore. Today, the Mini brand under BMW is still in production, but its long-term future remains to be seen in America's SUV and crossover-dominated car market. Yes, most people recognize them as Minis, but all it takes is to see a classic Mini next to a new Mini to know which one is the real and true Mini. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel.
Jeremy, give it 1500 RPM!
If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.
I don't understand winching, but I don't think that is part of it.